Hello, everyone, and welcome to Sports Talk with Tonsoni. I'm your host, Brian Tonsoni. It's July, and the MLB season is past its midway point. Baseball is center stage in the sports world right now, and there are a few pennant races to watch, but there are also so many exciting players to keep an eye on today. Today, my guest, Michael Duggan, and I will discuss some of those players as well as some other Major League Baseball topics. Michael Duggan is an upcoming senior at Indiana University, a member of the Assembly Call podcast, a host for IU Sports TV, co-host of the Interns podcast, and overall sports aficionado, having interned at many places throughout his college career. We are excited to have Michael on the show today. How are you doing?
Coach, thanks for having me on. I'm delighted to be here.
Great. And you are out east, correct, this summer?
I'm currently out east. I'm currently sitting in a hotel room in Bristol, Connecticut on my day off.
Very good. And so you've had some excellent opportunities in your internships, and you do a great job of talking sports. So this idea popped up and originated with the tweet of yours a week or so ago about Mookie Betts being a non-hometown player that is a must-watch. So today we're going to spend a majority of our time talking about those non-hometown players that you would like to go see. And maybe our listeners can tune in on television or go see at a ballpark near them. And we are both Cub fans, so that eliminates all of the Chicago Cubs. We are not going to talk about them. So there are a lot of reasons to tune into the Cubs and watch the Cubs, but we're going to stay away from our hometown team today. So let's come up with a team of players, every position, that we would pay to see or we would definitely tune in. And let's start with your first tweet, Mookie Betts. Why would he be in your outfield of the players we would pay to see?
Well, first off, speaking statistically, he's leading the MLB in batting average by a ridiculous amount, a ridiculous margin ahead of Jose Altuve. OPS is well over 1,000, and he's one of the league's best sluggers right now. He's got 23 home runs, and he's only 5'9", and I think that's what does it for me. You know, you look at this guy he stands at the plate and he's tremendous in the outfield too. But he really, really makes a name for himself rather at the plate. He's shorter than you and I, and he's hitting it as well as anyone in the league, with exception to perhaps JD Martinez, who bats just before him or just after him, depending on the day in the lineup. So the way that this guy slugs the ball mixed with his size or lack thereof, every time he steps up to the plate, he has my full attention.
Yeah, and his speed is outstanding. It's fun to watch him on the base pass when he's running for double, triple, whatever. He is consistent and he is a clutch player. So I definitely agree with Mookie Betts. You have two other outfield slots to fill. Who are I would pay to see outfielders that are going to join Mookie Betts?
Well, I think you kind of have to put Aaron Judge on that list. I think just because he's not really a guy that we have ever seen, we as viewers have ever really seen in the MLB. I mean, he's bigger than Rob Gronkowski, and he could turn a routine pop fly into a 400-foot home run. And it's not every day you see that, and it's not every year you see that. And he's a decent outfielder. He's reliable at times, but he's no Mookie Betts within that context. But just the way that he captivates an audience by simply existing in the batter's box, just given his size, kind of the opposite of Mookie Betts. He's such a physical specimen, and I mean, he hits the ball harder than anyone we've ever seen, maybe in the history of the game. So just looking at him, just kind of stare down a breaking ball or a fastball and thinking that even if this pitch is out of the zone, it could still be one of the hardest hit balls of the day. He's got my full attention as well whenever he steps up to the plate.
I would have him on my list as well, simply because of what could happen. Every at bat, you have to be on the edge of your seat because you can see something that you might never have seen in person, even seen on television, with his ability to hit the ball a long, long way. And that's exciting. And that's what, baseball fans like to see. I agree with Aaron Judge. And Michael, this should have been probably a lead-in, but what kind of things do you look for in Major League Baseball players? You've picked Betts and Judge, a small guy, a large guy, but what kind of criteria are you using in these selections that you would pay your money to go see?
Well, I think that the intrigue that some of these guys that I'm going to name have are they're pretty random, to be honest with you. Those two guys, Mookie is just an all-around star, and Aaron Judge, obviously with historic power. Those two guys, for batting purposes, I think mainly, at least for Aaron, put them on this list. But my third outfielder that I'll mention in a second is one of the worst, not worst, but one of the least reliable guys at the plate this season. I think that's routinely in the starting lineup, and he's only in the starting lineup for his team because of how reliable he is in the outfield, how he can track down essentially any ball that's hit within a 100-foot radius of him, it seems, no matter how hard it's hit or the launch angle or what have you. It's pretty random. To me, there's no strict formula that I said, all right, here's what I'm going to follow. Here's how I'm going to follow it and run from there. It's just for what, if they have something that's unique about them that makes me want to watch them more than any other person at their position or most other people at their position, that put them on this list.
That's awesome. Let's fill out your outfield. You have Judge and Mookie Betts. Who you filling your third outfield slot with?
I really hate to keep it in the same division, but watching Jackie Bradley Jr. track down line drives and fly balls in the outfield for the Red Sox the last I looked, he was hitting 200 on the season. And it's not often you see a guy that hits 200 that stays in the starting lineup for any team, let alone the MLB leading Red Sox. But what he doesn't bring to the plate, which is not a lot right now, he makes up for that and perhaps then some in the outfield. I mean, he's a total liability when he's hitting into the shift, and he just can't get the ball in the outfield. He can't hit home runs like he used to. He was never really a slugger, but a couple of years ago, he had a pretty solid presence at the plate. But this year, he's, for whatever reason, really, really struggling to get his bat on the ball. But this guy is a Gold Glove caliber outfield. I mean, I feel like every week you turn on SportsCenter and they'll do the top 10 plays of the week, and there's Jackie tracking some, fly ball or line drive in the outfield. He's tracking it down, he's sliding, he's jumping. And this is a Gold Glove caliber outfielder we're talking about with Jackie Bradley Jr.
You bring up an excellent point, and you warm a coach's heart with that comment, because there's a lot more to athletics than just the points and the offensive statistics. A lot of times games are won with outstanding defense, regardless of the sport. And I've always thought, I'm a basketball coach and a basketball guy first and foremost, but baseball is one of my favorite sports to watch. You have a good middle defense, your center fielder, your shortstop, your second baseman, your catcher, you're going to have a chance to be a good defensive team. And if you fill out with the third baseman, first baseman, so forth, but it's very, very warming to a coach's heart to hear someone talk about they want to go watch someone play defense. And so that pick of Bradley is awesome. Who are some of the players that you would have on your bench in the outfield? Because there's quite a few that I have listed, some young players that I would like to go see. Who are some that didn't make your top three, but you would still go pay to see?
Well, I can't believe that this guy did not make my list, but Mike Trout. I mean, he's objectively the best player that the MLB has right now. He's been that for a long time. And similar to Jackie Bradley, he's such an asset in the outfield, and he can basically place a ball when he's at the plate anywhere he wants on almost any given pitch that's near the strike zone. And I can't believe he's not on my list. And there's an interesting conversation we could have about him with what's come up this past week with the comments from Manfred and what have you. But to not have Mike Trout in my starting lineup almost makes me uncomfortable, but you can't leave him out of this conversation completely.
Yeah, and then there's a guy like Giancarlo Stanton, too, from New York, that same thing as Judge, can hit the ball a long way. I'm going to throw out a few names and see what you think of these guys. So here's some of the younger guys that I would like to go see. Herrera from Philadelphia, Benintendi from Boston, Acuna from the Braves, this Soto kid from Washington, and then Springer from Houston. Those are my 5 young guys that I would want to fill out a bench because I think with Trout and the 3 guys that you picked, I would be in agreement with that. But those are some of the 5 guys. Any of those guys on your radar?
It's hard to not put Stanton on there, right?
Right.
For pretty similar reasons that I said about Aaron Judge. It's hard to leave him off the list just because of that power. So I think of those guys that you named, he's got to be toward the top there, which really gives a lot of power in this conversation so far to one division in baseball, and rightfully so. I think definitely the most top-heavy division that the sport has to offer right now. But you look at Stanton, and everything I said about Judge reigns true for him too. When he steps in the plate, you don't know where he's going, and you don't know how far whatever he's about to hit is going to go, but you know it's going to go far. And he had some struggles in the first couple of weeks in the season, and everybody was thinking, uh-oh, is this getting to his head? Are the Yankees out on him? Because I know he had 4 or 5 strikeouts in one of his first home games in New York this year, and the fans were booing him. And I was saying, well, that's a good start for him. But he's definitely turned it around, and, I mean, he's seeing the ball extremely, extremely well right now, and that team is hot.
Very good. We like your outfield so far. So let's go to the toughest position as I was looking at this, and that is catcher. Are there any catchers that you would pay to see that aren't from your hometown? I know we have a good one in our hometown, but who would that be on your team?
Yeah, the catcher's tough when you eliminate Wilson Contreras because, objectively speaking, I try to be as objective as possible with this stuff. I mean, he's got to be the most exciting catcher. He can gun down anyone running to second base on any given pitch at any given time, and that includes guys like Billy Hamilton and whatnot. But I hate to agree with you here because I know we talked about this just before we started recording here. Yadi Molina, I mean, he's a guy that's been a St. Louis staple for years, and my mom's side of the family is from St. Louis, so I've been to a couple of Cardinals games in my life, and the way that they appreciate and love Yadi and the way that he approaches the game every day, and he's really, I think, the only guy right now in the MLB that could, realistically have the role of player coach that we haven't seen in sports, major professional sports, in a long time. He's got that kind of mentality, and it's similar to Wilson Contreras. He's a bit past his prime, but trying to run on Yadier Molina is next to impossible. I don't care who you are. I don't care how many stolen bases you have in your career. Trying to steal on Yadier Molina, especially in his prime, was almost a death sentence.
I have 2 boys that I love dearly, but they're both St. Louis Cardinal fans, so it makes for a in-family rivalry. But the one player that I do respect the most in the St. Louis organization is Molina. I just think, again, defensively, his leadership, I think speaks volumes for what I believe is good baseball. So I think Yadi Molina, as I went through all of the teams and looked at their rosters and their depth charts, Yadi Molina, outside of Contreras, is got to be the pick. So moving on to first base, any first baseman out there that really catch your eye?
2 names came to mind, both in the National League. One is Paul Goldschmidt in Arizona. I think this guy, I mean, you look at him, he is just a beast of a man. And that guy, we talked about Judge and Stanton. That's a guy that can hit a home run on pretty much any given pitch. I mean, that is just he's such a big guy that, he's just physically intimidating. If you're a pitcher looking back or looking down at the batter's box and seeing him, you gotta place your pitches perfectly. And another guy that I don't think gets enough national attention because of the team that he's played for the past few years, which they've starting to turn around a bit, but the season seems to be lost for them regardless, is Joey Votto. I think this is a guy that, I mean, he gives most pitchers fits. I know he has the Cubs number, especially this year. The Cubs, for whatever reason, are struggling against the Reds this year, and especially Joey Votto the last 2 or 3 years. I don't know the numbers off the top of my head, but his batting average and those hitting numbers against the Cubs have got to be off the charts because he just tears whoever is on the mound for the Cubs up. And this is a guy that, like I said, because he plays for the Reds and they've had very limited success since he's been there, not a lot of attention is being paid to Joey Votto. And he's a quiet guy like Mike Trout. That goes into the conversation of baseball not marketing its superstars or what have you. He's a quiet guy. I don't know how many people know how good he really is, but if you put this guy on a team like the Cubs or the Yankees or the Dodgers in a big market, this is a guy that, I mean, you would put in the superstar category. I think he's that good.
I agree. I saw a stat on Votto, and I'm not sure how true it is, but it sounds like an interesting stat. He has not popped up to the right side of the infield his whole career. That's second base, first base, or to the pitcher in that area. Again, that was on Twitter, so you don't know how true that stat is. But yes, I think he's someone that hasn't been recognized. I also had Goldschmidt on my list. And what happens sometimes for us in the Midwest and the East, I think the West Coast guys don't get as much attention because the games aren't on in prime time and they run a little late. But Goldschmidt has been an outstanding player, and he doesn't even make the All-Star team this year because there's some other outstanding first baseman, Freddie Freeman, uh, in the National League, so forth. The one guy that is not having a great batting average year, but he hits for power in the American League that I would like to go see is this Olson with the Oakland A's. They got Chapman at third base and Olson at first base and Chris Davis, the DH out in outfield. Again, they're out west. They're not the Houston Astros. They're not the Boston Red Sox. So I'm not sure how much publicity those Oakland A's get, but there's some young guys that I wouldn't mind going and watching. So now we move to the middle infield, and let's go to your second baseman on your team.
I got to go with Jose Altuve. I think this is a guy that he's even shorter than Mookie Betts, and we all saw what he did last October. And there's a trend here if you're not sensing. I think there is a little bit of a trend with the size of these guys. For me, I think almost everyone I've named is either abnormally large or abnormally small, and that comes with a lot of positives. But watching Altuve play, and he's got a pretty good story. Most of you know that story. If not, it's worth a look up. I won't waste our time with explaining it here. But he's got a great story of how he came to be a superstar against all odds. And watching him play is, I mean, he looks like he's the size of he was the size of me when I was, in high school. And this is a guy that's giving pitchers and batters nightmares when he's out in the field. And I love watching Altuve play. And whenever he was on screen last year in the World Series against the Dodgers in that great 7-game series, you couldn't take your eyes off the screen. There were superstars everywhere, and he was one of the headliners. So watching Altuve play it's a gift. It's visually, he's so graceful, and he's got such power and torque for his size, and he's a tremendous defender as well.
I am fortunate enough to have the MLB ticket on DirecTV, and I have a couple TVs downstairs in my man cave. And when the Cubs are on, I usually find a game that I kind of want to watch. And if Altuve's playing, I'll put the Houston game on simply to catch an at bat or a play that he makes. I think he is one of the best players in all of baseball, let alone at second base. A couple young guys that I would like to go see is Torres, New York, is having a great first season, all-star season. And Oscar Albies from Atlanta is intriguing to me as an up-and-coming. And obviously, we're not mentioning our Cubs, but if you don't pay to go see Javi Baez play, regardless of who your team is, I think you have some issues. And I don't get all the negativity about his flair, but the young man can simply play baseball. So those are some second basemen to watch. But again, Altuve, excellent pick. Let's move to your shortstop. Who is your top shortstop to watch?
Well, oh man, I've gone back and forth. I won't count Manny Machado because, I mean, the dude could play any position he wants. I know he does some shortstop, some third base. So, I mean, he's obviously, I think, one of the more underappreciated superstars in the MLB, maybe because he was on such a bad team in Baltimore. But I'm going to look to Cleveland here, and I'm going to say Francisco Lindor. I mean, this is a guy that is so solid in every aspect of his game. His power doesn't trump his ability to place a ball in left field and stretch out a double. His flashy glove doesn't outshine his speed. This is a guy that's just so rock solid at just about every aspect of the game. And back in 2016, when the Cubs faced him in the World Series, I mean, he'd show up in any crunch time moment that the Indians needed him to. He showed up, and that's the biggest stage that team has seen in baseball in a really, really long time. And I know they had a premature exit last year in the postseason, but this year I think they're one of the better teams in the American League. Obviously, the Red Sox and Yankees take the headlines there, but with the additions that the Indians have made this past week, led by Lindor, this is a team that behind him, as far as he goes, he will take that team. There's nothing he cannot do, and he's not overwhelmingly large, but one of the better home run hitters in the American League. So this is a guy that I think since that 2016 World Series has not made a ton of headlines, but is deserving of all of the ones that he does make and then some. He's a tremendous, just solid all-around player.
I love that pick, and I really love that pick after the All-Star game when he was mic'd up and just seeing his love for baseball come out in that segment when he was talking with the microphone on. But besides his ability to talk, he can flat out play. There's a lot of good shortstops. You mentioned Machado. Correa is a young guy at Houston that could make the list. And I've been tuning into some Seattle games lately because they're in the chase for a wild card spot, and Gene Segura has played well, and I'm not sure he would be on my top list, but he's one that caught my eye in getting ready for this show. But I do think Lindor is the person to watch at shortstop. Now we move to the hot corner, and who is your third baseman?
Well, again, I think I would say Manny Machado. I know that's his primary position at third base, but because he splits time, I'll disqualify him. But he's definitely my utility player. But for full-time third baseman, I got to go with Nolan Arenado. I would say Chris Bryant. I have to throw that out there. In your Javi Baez note earlier, he's for sure the best second baseman or the most noteworthy second baseman that I'd watch to play or I'd pay to watch play. But Nolan Arenado at third base is a slugger, and that's a guy with him and Charlie Blackmon out in Denver. That's a duo that perhaps because the Dodgers are so red hot lately and the Diamondbacks are on the come up, they're a young and solid team over the last couple of years. That's a duo out in the NL West that doesn't get a ton of attention that I think should. And, you know, for obvious reasons, Paul Goldschmidt's out there, and now the Dodgers have Machado, and when Seager's healthy, and Muncy and Bellinger, I could go on and on about superstars in the NL West, but Arenado and Blackmon, but mainly Arenado for me, at least at the third base conversation, obviously, because Blackmon's not a third baseman. Arenado has my attention whenever he steps up to the plate. This is a really exciting guy, and I think that those two could give the National League West, which is going to be such a solid division for the next couple of years, just fits when it comes down to early, mid, and late September baseball when those three teams are battling for at least one playoff spot.
I've had Nolan Arenado on my list to watch. I did a blog about 2 years ago, back when he was first come. He can hit the baseball, but then going back to something you said about Jackie Bradley earlier, he is one of the best defensive third basemen as well. And I think that combination is worth the price of admission to go see the Colorado Rockies. Outstanding baseball player. So that does it for your lineup. Let's go to your starting pitchers. And you can pick a few starting pitchers to round out your staff. Who are those guys that when you know they're pitching, you're going to go buy a ticket?
Well, I saw Stephen Wright play for Boston, the only active knuckleballer in the MLB. And I feel like the knuckleball is a lost art. I mean, hence the fact that he's the only knuckleballer left in Major League Baseball. But watching the knuckleball it takes me back to the days of Tim Wakefield and guys like that in the early mid-2000s. And you know, watching a knuckleball executed to perfection is a thing of beauty. So he's up there. Jacob deGrom has certainly made headlines for how great he's been and how little help he's received from his team. He's certainly up there. I think Chris Sale is hot right now. Those are probably the three guys that would come to mind. But Shohei Ohtani, he's technically a pitcher, right? You got to give it to him. And he may not pitch as often as and he's been hurt, so he hasn't pitched as much as those other guys that I've mentioned. But you want to talk about pitchers that are worth the price of admission, no matter where you're going. I think Ohtani's got to be toward the top of that list.
I agree. I had him on my list. I was just going to ask you if Ohtani would make your list. There's some older guys that have been dominant: Kershaw, Baumgartner, Verlander, that I think I would pay. I have this interest in Nola from Philadelphia for some reason. I kind of like LSU baseball. I'm an Indiana baseball guy, 100%, but I also kind of like LSU baseball for their tradition and watching him pitch for LSU and then come up with the Phillies. So that's kind of a reach for me. But yes, and neither of us said Max Scherzer either. So there's probably another guy, and we could go through all the rosters and find some. But that's a good list. Who's your closer?
Man, this is tough. I don't. There are so many. I mean, you look at guys like Chapman. Anyone that can throw 103, 104 has my attention. Brandon Morrow in Chicago. Obviously, we can't use him, but I think he's one of the more underappreciated closers right now because you don't really hear about him that often. But he does his job when he's healthy. He's not healthy right now, but should be off that DL shortly, and he'll go back to business as usual. But Wade Davis out in Colorado has been good. I think those are the three guys that would come to mind right now, with maybe Chapman coming at number one, because there's just something about watching a 104-mile-an-hour fastball 5 times in a row with the batter expecting fastball, and they're behind it every single time. That just, as a baseball fan, it makes you watch it and it makes you think, it makes you appreciate that pitch. And when someone can throw that fast, there's nothing you can do.
I don't know how any batter hits a 90-mile-an-hour fastball. At the Louisville Slugger Place bat company, they have a 90-mile-an-hour pitch coming in, and you can stand, there outside the glass. And I don't know how they hit that, let alone the 104. So, all right, let's quickly review and just give your the outfield guys again that you said the top 3 were.
We had Aaron Judge, Jackie Bradley, Mookie Betts.
Excellent. Your catcher?
My catcher was Yadi Molina. Got to give him the love. He deserves it.
First baseman?
First baseman, I had Joey Votto.
And your second baseman?
My second baseman was Jose Altuve.
And your shortstop?
Shortstop was Francisco Lindor of the Indians.
And your third baseman?
Arenado out in Denver. Got to give him the love. He deserves it, and he doesn't get enough of it.
And your closer was Chapman, and your 3 starting pitchers were?
They were Chris Sale, Stephen Wright, both Boston, and who was my third one? I'm completely blanking right now.
I don't think it was Ohtani. You mentioned him after.
Say that again?
Was it Ohtani?
Ohtani, that's it.
Yeah. So that is quite the roster. Hopefully, I threw in some guys for the backup parts of Michael's team. But if you're watching baseball and have a chance to tune in on television, or you're at a park near you, and some of these guys are coming into town, think about going and seeing them. They're outstanding players. We're going to just switch up here as we're talking to Michael Duggan about some Major League Baseball players to watch. We're going to end with a couple of brief segments. What are your favorite rivalries to watch? And if you had a chance to travel and go see one of these live, which rivalries would you want to watch?
Well, I've seen both Cubs Cardinals and Cubs White Sox, which are 2 completely different rivalries. Cubs Cardinals is a fierce, pure hatred rivalry. I mean, these 2 teams absolutely despise each other. The fans despise each other. That's a real, genuine, anger-filled rivalry, and that's a really, really fun one to be a part of. Cubs White Sox is less intense because obviously the White Sox are not they're not a great team in the MLB right now, but they will be. They got a ton of young prospects. They're on the come up, but that's a fun one where the fans kind of get behind it, and that's a bragging rights type of rivalry. That's a fun one to be a part of. And I think my 2 ones that I would travel to and pay whatever money I had to, with realistic limitations, of course, to pay to see, it has to be Yankees Red Sox, but especially this year. I mean, you can't script this any better. The Yankees have these up and coming guys like Gregorius and Judge and Torres, and their pitching staff is starting to come around, and then they go out and get Giancarlo Stanton in the offseason. Along with the Red Sox, they have Mookie Betts, JD Martinez, all these guys. We could go basically 1 through 7 in that lineup. I mean, you can't script it any better. I think this has ALCS matchup written all over it, and this is going to be one of the better years that this rivalry has ever seen. And then the other side is Dodgers-Giants. I know both these teams they haven't matched up in terms of how elite the other one has been. One has been good, one has been okay in the past few years, but I mean, right now, this is a rivalry that is as good as any in the MLB, I think, with exception to Yankees and Red Sox, especially after the Dodgers have just gotten white hot and added Machado last week. That's one, and 2 stadiums that I've never been to that I'd absolutely love to see a game in. If you can have those 2 teams playing each other, it's really tough to beat that. It's really tough to beat that. Maybe that's an excuse coming for me to watch a baseball game in Los Angeles or San Francisco out in California, but that's something I'd love to be a part of at least once.
You hit all of my rivalries, since I'm also a Cub fan, and then I had here on my list Boston, New York, and San Francisco and LA, and I'd love to see Boston, New York, and Fenway Park. I've only been to Fenway Park once, a long time ago. Saw Pedro Martinez pitch, and that was an excellent experience. But I'd love to see that there. And again, the San Francisco, LA, out west. I haven't been out west for any games, and that leads to our final topic. What ballparks do you really enjoy watching a game, or have yet to watch a game that might be on your bucket list?
I would say my top 3, and I haven't been to a ton. I think I've been to about 7, maybe. I think my top 3, I'll take Wrigley out of the equation because, I live pretty close to there and I try to go as often as possible. And that's objectively an outstanding baseball experience. It'll take your breath away. But the top 3 I think that I've been to are Fenway Park out in Boston, Busch Stadium in St. Louis. They just made a new Busch Stadium in 2006 to get rid of the old one. And people were super upset about getting rid of the old Busch. But what they did with new Busch and the area around it, is tremendous. It's a great game day experience. Those fans are super passionate, whether it's a Saturday night game in September against the Cubs or a Wednesday afternoon game in May against the Padres. That's a super great experience. And I urge everyone that can go to Busch to go to a game at Busch because it's fantastic. And I really like Coors Field out in Denver. I've been there. I was there years ago. My dad's side of the family all lives in Denver, so we all took in a Rockies game years ago. Hitters Ballpark, ironically enough, the game I went to, they lost 1-0. I can't remember what year it was, but I was excited to see a bunch of home runs, and I think they were playing the Dodgers, and it was 1-0. I think that one run was scored in the 8th inning or something, but I really like Coors Field. That's a fun, newer ballpark. So I think those are my top 3.
Okay, I got a quick question for you. Wrigley Field, where is your preferred seat? Or do you have one as long as you're in there in the stadium?
Quite honestly, I think as long as you're not beneath the overhang of the upper deck, there's not a bad seat in Wrigley Field. Obviously, if you're close to the field, that's as good as it gets. But if you're high up, that's just a perfect. There are no obstructed views when you're high up, and sitting at that 400, 500 level, you're looking down at the field. You can see everything. If you just look at second base, depending on where you are, you look at second base, and you don't even have to move your head the entire time. You can see everything. I would say 75 to 80% of the seats at Wrigley Field are perfect, and it's such a simple ballpark, and it's just a ton of fun. The bleachers is a different experience, and everyone should do that at least once. But for me, if I'm just kicking back and watching the game with a couple buddies, being up top, it's tough to beat that.
I'm a bleacher nut. I've been going since the mid '80s. This will tell you how old I am, Michael. We used to line up to buy tickets for $2.50 to get into the bleachers back in the 82, 83. And that's when I fell in love. Dave Parker was messing with us in right field, and we were chanting some things that we can't mention on this show to Dave Parker. I was a sophomore in high school with my uncle. So I'm a bleacher nut. I will take bleacher seats over any seat just for the experience. But that's great. I love Fenway Park. I've been once. I'd like to go back. What park have you not been to that would be the top on your bucket list?
Oh, man, only have to pick one.
Or you could go on. Pick 2 or 3.
Man. Okay, I'll say I've heard nothing but great things about Camden Yards out in Baltimore and Petco Park out in San Diego, and those great things may or may not have come from the mouth of the dear friend Ryan Phillips. I mean, he speaks so highly of that area and Petco, and he was speaking highly of it when Assembly Call came down to Bloomington this past winter. And I asked a couple people I knew from San Diego. I said, "Hey, how's Petco? I've heard it's fantastic." And they said, "Oh, you have to go. It's a great area. Area around the ballpark is fantastic." So, Petco's on that list. Camden's on that list. But I think just a step above both of them, and these are, I think, regarded as 2 of the top 4 or 5 parks in the entire MLB based off anyone that you ask. PNC in Pittsburgh and AT&T Park in San Francisco. I've heard from many people that PNC is their favorite ballpark in the MLB, and the Pirates are no good. So it's got to be great. And you see pictures of it. I've seen pictures of it. You've got the Pittsburgh skyline in the background. You've got the bridge basically right outside of center field, just a hop, skip, and a jump away. Not even just a scenic backdrop at PNC. And from what I've heard, that's a great baseball experience. So those are my top 2 right there.
I'm glad to have you on, because you're good at this and your sports, but we've been almost spot on. Everything I had on my list to talk about, you've brought up. Pittsburgh is the one park where I would really like to go if it was the top on my list. Petco Park, I think Ryan needs to host us out for assembly call meeting out there and go to the ballpark. I agree with you. Camden Yards is fantastic, but baseball is such a fun sport, I think, to watch. And like you said, go with your buddies, watch the game, watch some of these great athletes. And what else can you do here in the summer while we're waiting for the other sports? So last question, Michael, and then I'll let you go. I thank you for your time. What is it about baseball that you truly enjoy as a sport?
That's tough. That's such a tough question. I think because there are, I guess now not quite as much as there was maybe 5 or 10 years ago, because now it's a lot of home run or strike out. And, there's this whole controversy of hitting into the shift because batting average is so low. But I mean, you look at a sport like football, and this is a very macro level of thinking here, but you look at a sport like football and, you win by scoring touchdowns. Field goals aren't going to win you a football game. You win by scoring touchdowns. You look at a sport like basketball, in the NBA especially, you win by hitting threes. That's what's going to win you an NBA championship. But I mean, you look at baseball, there are so many different moving parts to it. And a guy like Jackie Bradley Jr. he couldn't hit a basketball from the pitcher's mound if you threw it at him. And yet he's one of the more valuable guys in that lineup for Boston because of how he can cover the ground in the outfield. And, you look at a guy like Aaron Judge and Giancarlo Stanton, you get a guy or two guys in any sport, any duo of their skill set and their size, you'd think they'd be the best team and they'd have the target on their back. And the Yankees are certainly one of the best teams in the sport, but they're probably not even the best team in their division. A World Series berth is all but a given from it's nothing. It's not a given for them at all. So there are so many different moving parts that contribute to success. And guys like Jacob deGrom has an ERA below 2, and he's 5-4, and the Mets are terrible. So there are so many different moving parts in baseball where you can have 3 sluggers back to back to back at 2, 3, 4 in your lineup, but an unreliable pitching staff, and maybe you're a mediocre baseball team. So there's no rhyme or reason to be better than anyone else in the league. You have to construct a solid all-around baseball team in every aspect in order to be elite. And we definitely don't see that in leagues like the NBA, but so many different moving parts that have to contribute to success. It's just what makes it a beautiful game.
Well said, my friend, and thank you for being on the show. I dropped my phone with all your bio information, so I'm a poor podcast host, but would you share with the listeners kind of what you have in store and where you might be reached via social media, please?
Yeah. So on Twitter, I am at M_Duggan44. Like you mentioned in the beginning, host of the Interns podcast, which will be firing back up in the next couple of days, actually, if I can. Obviously, I'm making a phone call for this podcast because the internet situation with my living situation for the summer is giving me fits the last 7 days. But we cover Big Ten football and Big Ten basketball over there, and Big Ten media days are this Monday and Tuesday, depending on when you're listening. So we're super excited to cover some Big Ten sports. College football is right around the corner, so definitely give us a follow there, and you can find me at M_Duggan44.
Very good. Michael knows what he's talking about. His podcasts are some of the best around. So give him a follow and tune in as the college football and college basketball season kicks in. Michael, thank you so much. I know as a senior, the last thing you want to do is come out and tailgate with an old guy, but maybe you can come out before you tailgate and grab a sandwich or two, and then you can head to your tailgates if that's what you do this fall. But we'd love to get together with you and discuss some sports again this fall.
Oh, I'd absolutely love to. Week 1, first home game, you'll find me there. Just let me know where to be and what time. I'll be there.
I'll send you. We get there early. It's a night game, so we'll be there in the morning and stop by at any time. But we appreciate you. Great conversation. Enjoy the rest of your summer. Be safe traveling back to Bloomington.
Thanks a lot, Coach. Really appreciate it. Always a pleasure. Thanks for having me on.
Thanks. And this will do it for this edition of Sports Talk with Tonsoni. You can find us on Twitter at SportsTon is the Tons, Tons, is the Twitter handle. We're going to start a website here in the fall with some high school student intern writers, so be ready to check that out. You can get a hold of me at Sony42 on Twitter. Please give us suggestions of any topics that you'd like to hear. We really appreciate you listening. That'll do it. Watch some baseball. It's good for the soul. So long.